to another episode of the Outside Podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Ebersole, co-founder of Big Sky Capital Group. We're continuing our conversation today with Natalie Fleming from Caldwell, Idaho. In the previous episode, we talked a little about creating rainfall affecting weather with how you farm and how bioaerosols change the water temperature and all that kind of thing to create more rainfall. And there seems to be a number of 24% increase in rainfall in different situations. So we're going to pick up that conversation today with Natalie. Natalie, welcome to the podcast again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Wayne. I'm happy to be here.
So I found our conversation about the bioaerosols very interesting. I really love that idea of farmers creating, or the theoretical idea of farmers creating their own rainfall, which I don't think it's theoretical anymore. But we talked about how dust changes the temperatures. Let's kind of pick up that conversation. And I think we ended talking about farmers, what can they do? Just kind of review that just a little bit, some of the things that they can do to maybe increase the rainfall over their area.
Okay. Well, the first thing you got to do is keep the ground covered year round. Just in the early winter, I was passing by Lake Lowell, and on the left field was a alfalfa field. On the right was a clear plow. Yeah. And I had to pull over on the side of the road because it was astounding to see the snow pile up over the alfalfa, and the field on the right that was freshly plowed, the wind was blowing all the snow away. It wasn't getting anything. Yeah. And you can just see that impact of just leaving the ground covered has. A lot of farmers are afraid. I think you mentioned before that if one farmer's getting water that they're taking, if somebody upwind or downwind, that they're taking your water away. And they really don't understand. CO2 split, the molecules go from carbon and oxygen. Yeah. The remarkable thing about water is it remains H2O through the whole process. Yes. When it rains, it's H2O. When it evaporates, it's H2O. Every stage, it's still H2O. And it's like a ping pong ball being cycled over and over again in the ecosystem. Yes. So if somebody upwind from you takes all your rain, it's going to evaporate again. And those plants are releasing aerosols that cloud seed at warm temperatures. So if you've got a farmer upwind and they're irrigating, well, that water is going to come right back up again, and it's going to rain down again, just like a pinball, over and over and over again. So you don't need to be afraid of somebody taking your rain. And so that's not the problem. As a matter of fact, if somebody downwind from you isn't using their water, they're more likely to get dust storms. And one of the things that we're seeing in Idaho is dust storms coming out of the east. Yeah, places where they're not irrigating. And if you look at how we talked about in the Palouse, yes, that the dust storms, if they're leaving the ground bare, and if downwind from them they're not getting water, a haboob is a failed rainstorm. What happens is in the afternoon it's hot, and the water goes up higher in the atmosphere, and it forms rain. But before it hits the ground, it evaporates because the ground is too hot. It evaporates before it hits the ground, and then it kicks up dust. And you can see the dust cloud below repelling it like Gandalf, you shall not pass. And you can see the rainstorm above when you watch these dust storms. There's a rainstorm above and a dust storm below just fighting each other. So you've got to keep the ground covered. You've got to transition to cover cropping and no-till. And you've got to maximize the amount of vegetation that is there year-round. So alley cropping, where you're cropping between trees, or at least have trees on the borders of your farmland, and using a diversity of different crops.
Yeah. I know Jay Fuhr from the University of North Dakota has talked about the fastest way to get water retention is to build your organic matter in your soil structure. And the way to do that is to, diversify your cash crops, keep the soil covered all year round, keep a living root in the soil, and then incorporate livestock. And it only takes, livestock grazing, say, cover crops for 6 to 8 weeks out of the year. And that's enough of re-inoculation to keep that biological process going. And that's kind of what we try to do with the farmers that we work with, is kind of get them into a system, figure out how to apply that type of system, I know a lot of guys in Montana say, well, you have to till in the fall so that the ground warms up in the spring, so you have enough of a heat to, germinate seed and things like that. But we've also found that temperatures will be warmer. Soil temperatures will be warmer where it's covered, and it will dry out and warm up faster, I guess because of some kind of carbon cycling process, typically where there's cover on it too. So there's still a lot of research, I think, that needs to be done there.
Well, when you're incorporating trees as windbreaks, you're mitigating both extremes. You've got more summer shade, and you've got more, you're blocking the winter wind. But remember that every blade of grass, every leaf on every tree, every piece of green, every bit of foliage, it has Pseudomonas syringae, a bacteria growing on it that cloud seeds at warm temperatures.
Yep. Interesting.
And when you're building that soil, like you said, a friend of mine, Stephen Rich, he put, I'm sure his neighbors loved him for this. It was either cow manure or poultry manure that he put on his lawn. And then he also put a little bit of a clover mix in his lawn, either accidentally or intentionally. And within a couple of years, he had 17 inches of topsoil in his lawn, which was just incredible. So bringing in the livestock and getting the rapid nutrient cycling that the livestock provide. And so,
I want to transition a little bit away. We have a lot of talk about RFK Jr. Coming into the new administration. He's been obviously very vocal about vaccine, the damages and the research that needs to be done before they're released. But he's also been pretty much a food and agriculture guy too, like growing healthy food, getting chemicals and poisons out of our food. What's your take on all that? Let's talk about that, and how does that fit in with regenerative agriculture?
Well, to be honest, I haven't listened to a lot of RFK, and people keep telling me, Natalie, he's saying everything you've been saying for the last 10 years is what he's saying. You need to be listening to him because he's saying everything you've been saying. So on that front, chemicals are a big deal. I have 2 kids on the spectrum, and my children have had serious medical issues.
Interesting.
And so I started going down the chemical rabbit hole from endocrine disruptors. The tremendous amount of endocrine disruptors from our clothing to our food. It is really frightening to happen when it impacts your family. Our whole food system is a nightmare. It is corporatized. Even SNAP, the food assistance that is through the Farm Bill, it has been corrupted 100%. It's all subsidies of snack companies. So, our sicknesses, our illnesses are being subsidized by the government. So the government pays for the toxins in our food, the red 40 that makes our kids go crazy. And then, you've got food stamps paying for that. And then the Medicaid pays for the kids to go to the doctor to get their ADHD drugs to help them stave off the chemical behaviors that they're getting from their food. And so on the medical side, and it pays for the counseling, it pays for everything. So it's a huge racket. If you've been in the back of a grocery store, here in the West, we have a store called Winco. You go back to the warehouse behind, and stacked to the ceiling, and these are huge buildings. You've got soda pop, and you've got chips, and you've got garbage, absolute garbage in our food supply. And it's all paid for by the taxpayers, all of it.
Interesting.
And we are being poisoned on the farm side, on the food side. So we definitely do need to clean up the food supply and get the racket out of it. And we can talk about lobbyists and how the whole Congress is corrupted through these horrible companies poisoning us. And SNAP, food stamps, food assistance is really a subsidy for corporate corruption.
Interesting. So, corporate snacks. I like that. So I know Europe has a lot more stringent standards than what we do. And there's people that said, they have, they think they have gluten intolerance or something like that. And yet they go to Europe and they eat the bread and they eat the pasta over there. What needs to happen? Obviously we need to get it out. How do we get it out? What's your idea for making a change that still benefits agriculture, but makes our food healthier?
Well, obviously, glyphosate is a problem. Reducing chemical usage is they say that a lot of it really isn't the grain itself, but the chemicals we're spraying on it. So we have some really brave farmers who have explored grains that are non-toxic, and a lot of the heritage grains. So we've got to have some courage there. And I love the internet, and I love the time that we live in, that we have so many people who are willing to try these things for us ahead of time, experiment on different farming methods before us. And so we don't all have to be the pioneers, because there's enough pioneers out there pioneering these better farming methods. So there's on the grain side, we need to move towards, I believe in the heritage grains, and taking the chemicals out of it as much as possible. And then, of course, the food system that I think is like one of the most incredible production systems I've seen is down in Sebastopol, California. There's a farm called Singing Frogs Farm.
Oh, interesting.
And they are very high yield. They're doing produce, and they're making $110,000 to $149,000 per acre per year. Wow. Of course, 75% of that does go to labor, but they have a very high yielding model. And it's out of town. And I would love to see, I love what they're doing. They're doing the no-till. It's not your grandma's garden. It's much more productive. It's not a community garden where people don't show up. They're actually, it's a high yield, high production model.
It's a for-profit operation?
For-profit operation. They're doing a great job. But I think their model would be awesome to be used in different church organizations. I know there's a lot of churches across the country that have land, but I would love to become the Amazon of Singing Frog Farms. And I mean, as far as putting it at high yield, really maximizing their system, and have these little farms, not out of town, not near town, but in town. There's a lot of empty lots that people have where they do not want to sell because they don't want it to go to developers. But you can buy it or lease it from them. They'll even let you use it for free if you say, hey, we're going to be growing food here and contributing to the neighborhood.
Interesting.
But that production model can be really well monetized in town.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many acres are there, and what all are they growing on that farm?
I think they're only growing between 2 to 5 acres of land there, and they're just doing all the different produce that you would, get at the grocery store. And, they did a study years ago where they compared the produce in the grocery store with the weeds growing in the cracks in the sidewalk in San Francisco, and found that the weeds in the cracks in the sidewalk in San Francisco had a higher nutrient density.
Wow.
I feel like a lot of the produce that we have at the store, I'm sure most of us listening have had fresh tomatoes from our garden, or we've taken the nectarine off of our nectarine tree and tasted it's just juicy and it's delicious, and it just falls apart as we eat it, and it's amazing. And it really ruins you because you go to the grocery store and those peaches comparatively taste like and feel like styrofoam. Yeah. And that flavor is a reflection of the lack of nutrient density in the food. And I think there's something about getting your food local, the increased nutrient density, and getting the right food in the right season. Yeah. So this is something that is surprising, but I read a study years ago that oranges can cause cancer. And they always say, oh, it cures cancer, it causes cancer, and the science keeps us confused. Yeah. But what they found is that the oranges cause an increase of sensitivity to sunlight, which is what you need in the wintertime. And you don't need that in the summertime. Yes. So there's something about, there's some unknown about every piece of every food in the right season that benefits you that you don't know about. So if it grows locally in your area at yours in the season that is now, there's something in that's really good for you. Yeah. And so their model, I would love to see that on a grand scale. I've laid awake. I've got a big plans for that. So different people, different organizations to target to make that really happen. Yeah. But that is one model I'd love to see happen.
Are they selling their produce then to grocery stores? Are they selling it to local farmers markets? What's their sales outlet for that?
I believe so. I think 45%, I believe, is CSA, and then I'm guessing 45% is like the farmers market. I'm not sure. I can't give those numbers. And then they sell to farmers market, CSAs, and restaurants. I would rather do it in town and do straight up DoorDash, Uber Eats delivery.
Oh, retail directly.
So like these people who want to do juicing and they have a certain mix that they want to juice, you can put your order in, and in 2 hours it would be from the dirt to your front porch.
Interesting.
And you can juice it.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds incredible.
Yeah.
Locally grown food.
Yeah.
Which is what we used to have 100 years ago. Everybody had a garden. Even people in town had a little plot out back that they grew some things in, and or had a greenhouse. Maybe later on they had a lot of greenhouses. So
yeah, and they grew gardens in the wintertime. There's a couple authors. There's Nikki Jabor and Caleb Warnock, who've written some really great winter gardening books. And so in Caldwell, Idaho, on August 30th, I planted a garden, which is absolutely nuts. This was, I think, 2014 or 2016, 2014. Yep. And it was just before it was the year before snowpocalypse. And the idea in the winter garden is there's vegetables that grow just fine and thrive in the winter. And the idea is to get them to grow to just the right size before winter hits.
Oh, okay.
And that was, for me, by far the easiest garden I ever grew. It was delicious. I discovered that kale is not gross. The problem with kale is that it's supposed to go through a winter frost. And just like sugar beets, that converts the starches to sugars, and they're sweeter and delicious. And the kale in the garden after multiple frosts is absolutely delicious. So if you do a market garden and you do the winter gardening, people will discover that a lot of foods that we think of as grotesque are just basically like an apple that isn't ripe yet.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So yeah,
I didn't know that. I know.
So yeah,
that's kind of interesting because we had some guys that would graze cover crops, and we always put. I'm a big fan of the daikon radish as a cover crop because of how it opens up the soil, and it actually acts as a biostimulant. And cattle would not eat a lot of radish in the fall, but once it went over through a frost, they would then start to. So it's the same process. Interesting.
Yeah, like a sugar beet, it just sweetens up. Well, have you ever had certain varieties of grapes really sweeten in the frost too? Yeah. And so on the way to school, there was a certain grapevine. It got sweeter and sweeter as winter came in.
Interesting. I like ice wine too. That's grape. That's wine made from grapes that have been frozen.
Wow. And there's, Sebastopol, Singing Frogs Farm, they're a model in Sebastopol, California. So they have a certain climate dynamic.
Yeah, they do.
There's other farms like them. You've got Neversink Farm with Connor Crickmore in New York State.
Yeah.
And he has a system that works. So you can take these models and combine them to what works in your ecosystem, in your community, and really have a high yield garden wherever you live. And he's making the same profits that they are. So it can be done. It can be profitable, and we could feed people locally.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. So, let's make a hypothetical situation. You've been nominated by RFK to be Secretary of Ag for the next 4 years. Where do you see regen ag farming going? What would you do to incentivize it? How would you? What all would you? How like I said, I'm kind of more of a conservative / libertarian person. Less government interference, the better. But we've also highly commoditized farming to the point where cattle prices today are still about the same as they were 100 years ago, and wheat prices today are the same as they were 75, 100 years ago. So what would you do to change, to try to incentivize change in this model?
Well, first of all, thank you for letting me take over the world. I will have a great time with it. This is my fantasy here. I would love to. I would love to take over. I'll be kick everybody over and shove the new Secretary of Ag out and take over. But first thing, so many things we've got to legalize the mobile milking parlor.
Oh,
we've got to legalize water retention landscapes. Water retention landscapes are very highly controversial and illegal in most areas because you've all heard the stories of the farmer who builds a pond and then gets fined $25,000 a day because apparently ponds are evil or something.
Yeah.
So the WOTUS, Waters of the United States, those laws need some dramatic changes to legalize the water retention landscapes. That there's too many. You got to get rid of the legal monstrosity barriers to them. You've got to do the Corps of Engineers, you've got your state laws, you've got your federal laws. I can't remember how many different canopies of laws prevent us from building these water retention landscapes. Stop subsidizing the nasty stuff. So you want freedom. Well, stop subsidizing farming systems that are destructive and that are predatory. Sorry, they're going to hate me for this, but stop subsidizing high fructose corn syrup.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of crops that we could stop subsidizing. The Prime Act with Thomas Massey to legalize, what is the correct word? Is it arbiter? What is the word? It's a slaughterhouse, the polite word.
Yeah. The cattle word. Processing plants.
Cattle processing. Yeah. Right now we have a limited number of processing plants, and you have the livestock go through so much trauma going from the farm to the location that we need to remove the barriers to allow this processing to happen on farms, so the livestock can have a great life. They say that, a great life in one bad day, but how about a great life in one moment that isn't that's unpleasant? So it improves livestock conditions to pass the Prime Act and allow farmers and ranchers to sell direct to customers without all the extra loopholes. That's a huge one. But regen ag, that it is regenerative, holistic. It's way better than organic. Sorry, because you got to look at the whole process. That is the future. That is how we heal our planet. Because in regenerative, in holistic, we're looking at the full ecosystem. We're looking at the soil. We're looking at the bioaerosols. We're looking at everything from beginning to end. And still, instead of this monosyllabic thinking, where we think, okay, you're looking at the whole picture, and we're helping solve the climate issues by restoring the water cycles. We're restoring soil health by restoring the soil food web, and we're nourishing the people. But basically, I would like to flip the food supply as much from global to local. Yeah.
There's a lot of, I know there's a lot of ranchers around here that are competing against Argentine and Brazilian cattle that are coming into the country. And I'm not always for tariffs, but I think in this situation, tariffs on cattle coming in outside, I think would be very beneficial. I don't know. It's just my opinion on it, but who knows?
You do think it is beneficial to have them coming in from Argentina? Is that what you said?
No, I think it'd be beneficial if they're going to bring cattle in. You've got to put tariffs on the cattle coming in.
Oh, okay. The tariff would be beneficial.
The tariff would be beneficial. Just a little side interjection here, and I don't want to hold you up from continuing that process, but talk a little about the difference between organic and regenerative ag. And a lot of people assume they're the one and the same, and they're not.
No.
I think I understand the difference, but maybe explain that a little bit.
Well, organic is it's kind of an oxymoron to me, because you're still doing the monocropping. You're still using a lot of high chemical use, but you're not calling it chemicals because it might be coming from a plant. Organic doesn't necessarily mean you're building soil. It doesn't mean
you're doing heavy tillage oftentimes.
Yeah, you're doing heavy tillage, and you're doing a lot of monocropping, and you're not worried about. Organic is about reducing chemical use pretty much only, and it isn't. You're not looking at the whole system's operate. You got to look at the whole system, everything. Not just from when you put the crop in the ground, but what's happening. I know that there's like a 3-year period of not using specific chemicals, but anything in high density is really becoming if you've ever taken a chemistry class, you know how absurd it is to use the word chemical, because everything's a chemical.
Absolutely.
Everything's a chemical. Water is a chemical. But I really don't see organic as really as beneficial. I don't like hydroponics. I don't know, hydroponics can be, they say hydroponics can be organic, but I'm like, we don't have a dirt scarcity. Why are you growing things in water? We have plenty of dirt. Please put it in the dirt.
All the vertical farming stuff that's going on, there's some of that too.
Yeah, just getting plastics. I mean, you can have plastics, high levels of plastics in your system and call it organic. And the less, this is the dumbest thing ever. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I got caught up in that, when I was going through this growth phase where I was like, oh, hydroponics, that looks really cool.
Yeah.
But that's more plastic in your system. And no, try to reduce the plastics as much as possible and building ecosystems. So regenerative is about building ecosystems.
Yeah.
So
I forget who made the definition of it, but it was like, it's working with Mother Nature, not against Mother Nature. Mother Nature has different regions of the country that have different kinds of water cycles, different climates, different places where things can be grown. And there's some people that say, well, with your farming model, like the Singing Frog Farm or something like that, that's not going to feed a growing population. You're not going to be able to produce enough food that way. You've got to have mass operations to do. What do you say to those people?
They're wrong. You can grow, if you read Restoration Back Agriculture by Mark Shepard, he really focuses in that book, he focuses on calories per acre. Not just pounds per acre, but how many calories. We can grow far more calories there. If you look at $110,000 per acre per year, and you look at that not in the dollar value, but in what that represents, the amount of the high yields, they're getting the doubling, tripling, quadrupling yields. You're getting much higher yields with these systems. Yeah. And you're also growing year round. So regenerative, by keeping things in the ground, you're growing year round, and the crops are coming up faster and healthier, and you have a higher nutrient density. You can absolutely feed far more people. And as a matter of fact, what are the numbers on small farmers globally? I believe it's like 70% of the food that we get. Well, maybe not here in America, but especially in other countries. Yeah, they're actually coming from the small farmers outside of the U.S. So
the other thing that I found interesting too is I was working with a rancher in Western Colorado who bought a ranch that was basically sagebrush. It was really beat down, and he turned that around. He took his organic matter from, I think it was like 0.5% to 1%, all the way up to 7 to 8% organic matter in like a 15 to 20 year period. But his nutrient density, all he did was grow a mixture of hay for cattle. But his nutrient density of that hay went up by, I think it was almost over 30%, a little over 30%. And the ranchers around there loved his hay because they could feed 30% less hay, and their cattle were satisfied. They would quit eating sooner. And it was fascinating to me because he got a premium. At that time, everybody else was charging $4 for a small bale of hay, and he was getting $6 or $7 for a small bale of hay. He was making a lot of money just simply because he built his soil up, and he actually was able to drop his chemical usage too. Like he basically went down, when I say chemical, he was putting some nutrients into his soil. He was using fish fertilizer and a few things like that, but it was all more natural based, not synthetic chemicals going into his soil. So it can be done. It is, and it's amazing how much less food you need when the nutrient density is there.
Well, and one of the big things that I find incredibly impressive is the resiliency against climate extremes. So we've got Brad McIntyre with McIntyre Family Farms or Family Pasture in Caldwell, Idaho. We had a day of fasting and prayer to pray for rain for the community. Meanwhile, his cows are fat and happy, and he had planted. He was fine, and he's like encouraging everybody to start praying for rain, and he's doing great. And other people were sending their livestock to his land to graze, and he has a high diversity seed mix where he really mixes in a lot of. You increase the diversity of your seed mix for grazing, and you're going to have resilience, and it grows faster, and it's greener, and it covers that crop, and the soil goes deeper. But in every single story I've seen, you hear about Gabe Brown grazing his livestock in December in North Dakota. You hear about, Brad McIntyre, still grazing and selling forage to other farmers when everybody else in the valley is having a drought. You read about Mark Shepard in the preface of his book. The person who wrote the preface, they said they while they were driving to the farm, there was massive flooding in the community, and he thought, oh, I shouldn't go visit Mark. This is a terrible day. And he drives up, and Mark and his interns are laughing and talking, and his farm has retained and absorbed all the water. They're just fine. And so you see people breaking the drought flood cycle. You see people having, rich land when everything else is dried up. You see people handling the winter fine. But you see incredible resilience.
Yes.
And of course, less disease, because the monocropping is leading to greater diseases and whatnot. But the incredible resilience. So
yeah. No, and I've observed that as well too, working with farmers. In fact, we had a grower that grew radish seed for us for cover crop in Oregon, and he planted half of a pivot in the radish seed, and it was on a hillside. And the top part of it, I forget what he had in the top part, maybe it was clover or something, but he had radish in the bottom part, and they got a heavy rainstorm. This was in eastern Oregon, so heavy rainstorm, and all the water washed off the top half of this pivot until it hit the radish ground. And this was just after growing one crop of radish. It all went into the ground. It didn't even make it to the bottom of the hill. And that was a huge thing to see, that how just that one crop opened up his soil enough for him to absorb all that water into it. So yeah, what you're saying, I've seen it myself. Yep.
It is the way of the future, and this is the real answer to climate.
Yes, I agree with that. A lot of people talk about that. I know that when you till soil, especially virgin soil or soil that's not been tilled for a long time, one tillage pass releases, I think it's 70% of the carbon dioxide in the soil that's sequestered there. And so if you're going to sequester carbon, you got to go back to the planting and covering the soil and putting plants in there all year round to sequester that carbon. So, and that's a measurable number too. So, well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you for taking time to come on and finish out another episode of the Outside Podcast. Where can people get in touch with you? What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
I'm available on LinkedIn. Just send me a connection request, and I'll be your friend.
Look for Natalie Fleming on LinkedIn, and you can enjoy her posts all about how the dust in Africa is making hurricanes. And maybe we should go after the insurance agents and say, hey, you want to cut down on the hurricanes? Let's invest in the Sahara.
Well, they've made dramatic improvements there. That's a whole other conversation. They've done great.
They have. I've read some of that. Yeah, they have.
The Great Green Wall is working. If you look from 2023 to 2024, the dramatic satellite images. Yep. But yeah.
Interesting.
We've made some great progress.
Well, this podcast will be up on all the platforms after a bit where you can watch it and listen to it. Thanks again, Natalie. I really appreciate your time coming on and talking about this, and I'm looking forward to continuing conversations in the future.
Thank you, Wayne.